So hello everyone, my name is Bharati and welcome to the virtual webinar on entrepreneurship during the pandemic. I'm super excited to have you all with us, and joining with us today is Stephen Roux and Jaakko. Thank you very much for making it, and we really appreciate your time with us. So you've got the Q&A section right at the bottom of the screen. If you have anything that you'd like to throw in while the whole section is going on. And Stephen Roux, the CEO of Dragon Tree Capital, Vice Chair of the ADC Forum, Network Chair at the YPO Global Diplomacy Network, and Jaakko, who's the founder of Feedbackly, the CX Forum, and the CX Academy. So a couple of things that we're going to cover during this webinar is doing business during the pandemic, some of the best practices and examples, managing entrepreneurial teams during the pandemic and the crisis, influence of pandemics on well-being and outcomes, innovation in times of COVID-19 and crisis. Stephen, over to you.
Sure. Let me start. I think sometimes these things are very conversational, and I'm sure people have seen them. But I guess what I wanted to sort of set a framework of is what is this crisis ultimately the same for everyone, and I think that's where I wanted to start. And the key thing is it probably isn't. People, whilst there's a global constraint around travel and which has a dynamic effect on hospitality and other businesses and those businesses that serve them, there are some businesses that are doing well, and there's some businesses that have seen incredible growth, and there's some sectors like database services or even customer experience like Jaakko, your business, where people are having to find remote solutions and remote operations, and they're adapting. So I guess the first point I would say is some of the best practices is working out where you sit, whether your business is one that is ultimately able to quickly adapt to, or has been able to adapt in the environment we face. Where can you remotely manage? Do you have your data systems in place? Are your financial statements in a form which, if you need financial assistance, or you're growing and you need financial funding, you're able to produce those to an investor on short notice? And those sort of things are, I think, where we've seen from our investment funds perspective, that businesses that excelled or have been able to do very well during the crisis is they've had their house in order. They're effectively investment ready, or stakeholder ready in the case of their customers. So there's two things that I guess I would say are really good examples of making sure at least you give yourself the best chance, or businesses the best chance. And one is making sure your financials and your data sets are current and up to date, such that they're readily available on convenient software, and at a leadership position, whether you're a CEO of a business or whether you're a service business helping a CEO or leadership team, getting the house in order is really critical. The other side, and I might we can jump between maybe Jaakko and I, but the other side I wanted to share was I think everyone, the point of my first point is really everyone's facing a different type of crisis. And it could be a crisis of growth, but for those where it's not a crisis of growth and it's a crisis of fundamental loss of customers, loss of reduction in income, and the customers in your business are just not there, or they're different, or they're not responding to your usual sales or marketing techniques. The key thing is to actually find out what is their driver. Are they in a crisis mode? Therefore, all the things that you knew about your customer have actually changed. And as I said, the customer could be an investor. It could be the customer, the end user, whether you're B2B or B2C. But I think the key point is to understand the customer. Our businesses and all of our businesses ultimately generate revenue somewhere. And it's actually about not understanding just how the crisis affects you, but have you got enough data, have you got enough evidence to actually be in a position to understand your customer and how they're experiencing and what changes are going on for them? And then you can make the decisions you need in terms of how you manage and adapt your business. So my two sort of key things that I picked up and observed in a lot of our portfolio and new investments that we've seen are making sure the companies are as ready as they can financially to produce reports when and if they need funding, and encouraging the entrepreneurs who run them to be ready. And then secondly, making sure the customers of those investee companies are really understood by the entrepreneurs. It's really problem solving and making sure you understand the problems they're facing. So they're the two things I would say have been highlights of good practices where businesses have been able to get funding or been able to generate success and growth, even in the adversity we've faced. There are obviously the fundamental challenges of hospitality, travel, and others that, that there are systemic or structural issues that are different things, but maybe we can come back to them. Jaakko, did you want to share yours?
Yeah, maybe I can add to that with a practical example from Feedbackly and what basically how the year has been in a sense, and what we've went through and what we learned from that. And of course, thank you, Stephen. We've been working with our case throughout, and being a tremendous help on sparring me with the ideas and things to do. But just to give an example for how I saw it, for example, from a founder and CEO perspective when the pandemic hit, is that I have basically three things or three themes, which is essentially team, finances, and business. And from a team perspective, we were pretty well off in a sense that we were already working remotely, mainly most of the time, I would say 50%. So our world didn't change too much. Like, okay, now I'm sitting at my home office. I already did that before, so no big changes there. From a financial perspective, and what Stephen mentioned, one of the big things that came about, what was essential on working through finances and getting more funding, was exactly that clarity and on that reporting. So I would say that companies that have that covered already before been working much better through the pandemic, because if you don't know where you are, if you don't have that clarity, you really were in trouble on when the crisis starts. And it doesn't have to be pandemic; it can be any sort of other crisis. So kind of like reflects your business with a higher amplitude when the problems start to pile up. So it's always a good idea to have that clarity, even though that you might not be raising money or getting like financing right now, but you might need it in a month, in 2 or 6 months. So you need to be up to date at all times. And then definitely from a business perspective, from our perspective, of course, we had some, hospitality and event manager customers, so that actually, took a hit to us as well. But I think that one of the biggest things, what we didn't understand, which is a little bit ironic because we are in the understanding business of customer experience, is that in the beginning of the pandemic, what we did is that we actually made a program of, we made discounts and reduced prices and different kind of campaigns on trying to figure out how to move forward. But it didn't work. And the actual thing, what we had to do is that we had to go back to the drawing board and try to understand how the needs of the customer changed through the pandemic, because everybody was thinking about surviving and how we could help with that. And that actually, opened up a new kind of like way to look into the business for us. We kind of like really restructured everything that we offer, not necessarily the product, but in the end, the fact that how and we talk with the customer, because everything, from our process perspective was remote. We didn't have to change basically anything, not even sales process. It's still the same as it was before pandemic, but what we just tell to the customer and understand customer is completely different than basically 9 months ago. So those are, I think, my biggest things and learnings from the past 9 months or 10 months.
Yeah. Jaakko, if I could jump in there, I mean, I think, we have just for everyone's benefit, we have a relationship before this webinar where were an investee in your business. And one of the things that I observed then was it was probably three things that, you know, I think you did really well, and you know, no one knew the answer at the time, but it was just to make sure you had your costs under control, and being just really disciplined on cost management. And you can only do that if you've got ready data available and you have a deep understanding of, I guess, your business. But there was a human piece as well. I think you were very engaged with your team, and you were huddling. You were doing regular huddles, and you were thinking about the third thing, which was, is our product still relevant? Like being able to fundamentally question your fundamental business, objective at a time of crisis is more important than anything. And I think I remember a couple of exchanges we had, which was, where we were seeing in another investee company, which we shared with each other on, was, a CX offering, a customer experience software, SaaS software offering in the healthcare space, where the healthcare sector is going through this rapid transformation, but it was a growth sector. Yet no one was buying, because for that 6-8 week period where the hospitals were overrun, regulation was, and it's still in some countries, I'm sure some people see it, today still, there's still, an element of crisis mode, but it was being able to see through the crisis, but to work out what part of your product was actually, in your case, Jaakko, I think, you had physical tablets in your customers. You had, point of sale device, customer data. You had surveys and websites. So you had all these different touch types. So, I guess maybe you could talk to how you saw the behavior change, because you were in the retail sector for some of your clients as well. Like, were people less willing to buy the tablets, but you were still able to keep them as a customer with your digital offerings, and then being able to communicate that back to the investors to say, hey, this is still actually more relevant than ever. So.
Yeah, and maybe that just as a comment there, I think that's basically exactly it. That we noticed that also our customers were changing ways, and what I mentioned there is that what was relevant to the customer, not necessarily what we could offer, but what was relevant to the customer, and we were able to react to that. And like you mentioned, in our case, there was actually three things on it. It was exactly that push to that digital space. So basically, when the e-commerce boomed from our retail customers as well, that's where we needed to be able to support them from a customer experience perspective. Then also, the leaning towards the entire big picture. It actually it was where it boomed a lot, because basically before, companies were very more more specifically interested in smaller things, like one touch point or one communication point with the customer. And now it came like as a bigger question, like again, like you said, are we relevant to the customer at all? So they have to come back to the drawing board. And that's where our software and our products and services had to change as well. That's a huge way of difference of way of thinking, in the way of thinking on how we work with our customers as well.
What were the worst examples you saw? I'm curious, of where people, your competitors or your clients couldn't adapt to being able to keep their financial surety together.
From our perspective, I think that the worst ones were when what we saw in our client base is that they didn't do anything. They didn't even try anything. And in that case, also the customer, they're starting to abandon them, because like the companies that were trying to do something, what we see from the CX data is basically that also customers they have some sort of empathy towards the services and the products that they liked, and companies who have invested in CX before, it actually now it started to show on the financial side as well, because they were more loyal. On the customer side, they were able to or they were willing to give a little bit more to the company or to the service just to keep them running. So they were more patient, they were waiting longer, and that sort of stuff. So companies that didn't do anything, and we do have one example that I'm not able to disclose by name, but they just went bankrupt in a week because it's just like they didn't do anything, just like didn't even try, which is of course horrible, but that might happen as well.
That's the reality. Yeah, I mean, I think from an investment perspective, and obviously I wear two hats from Acario and Dragon Tree, but I think the biggest challenge we saw with investees were, people were waiting, and I think that was the worst thing. I think, which is similar to what you've described. People who it wasn't about necessarily financiers or investors. Some of them had cash, and so it was, and a lot of them, a lot of our peers, investment funds and so forth, were encouraging the investee companies, portfolio companies like yourself, to actually raise money if they needed it. Just so there was an 18-month window, there was a period, so you have fuel to actually survive in the instant. But I think those that didn't act or waited, they were the ones who suffered. But I picked up what you said there as well. I think those who didn't listen to the customer lost the loyalty of the customer at a time when the customer was requiring support, and we see that too in terms of from the investment side. Dorothy, should we move on to the next?
Yeah, just an interesting. I thought the audience would like to hear about the well-being. Maybe we can touch a little bit on that.
The well-being in terms of the team,
the pandemic overall, probably the crisis, and how important, or what sort of importance should we be giving to the well-being overall?
Sure. Do you want me to tackle that first, or Jaakko, do you want to have a go? What?
You can please go ahead.
Okay. I'll jump in.
Yeah, go for it.
Look, I mean, I think it's a good point. I mean, well-being is a really good way of sort of summing up this second point here around, how do you deal with your team? How do you deal with the human aspect of this? I think it was a real test of the humanity and the culture in the companies that we've observed, and shrewd investors see that, and they see that as a stickiness. So for companies wanting to raise money or wanting to raise finance, if the leadership didn't lead and didn't show care and humanity for their team, not only would they lose their customers, they would risk losing their team. And some of that was just good business, and some can say they're doing it for their economic incentive, and that's in some ways that's okay. But the outcome was people felt cared for or looked after or supported. And I think that's the duty of any company or organization where the leadership's role is to sort of navigate a team and the customer through the crisis. So I think we saw some companies, and I think Acario was one of them actually, that actually provided food packs for staff and provided support through emotional support or physical training support, and brought teams online. And I think some of those practices can survive post-pandemic. There's some things in the well-being of actually realizing that these companies, our organizations, are actually just us people working together. So I think those investors pick that up as well as a thematic, and we'll take that forward and look for that, because it's a sign of resilience, the way people look after their team and their customer ultimately.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to continue on that, I think I will refer to what I said before, is that if you did these things well before, you most probably survive through this from a team perspective and leadership perspective as well. But one thing that I would bring out even more is the trust towards your own team, and also trying to be flexible yourself as a leader, as a manager, or an entrepreneur, because basically this situation comes out, and sometimes those can be something that you've never ever encountered before. Somebody gets sick, like how who pays to that person, or if they have to stay home. For us, we've been fortunate that we can work from home. We don't have to, as a digital business, we don't have to worry about somebody staying at home. But for a person, for example, if you're in customer service and somebody says that you have to stay home, like there's a question mark right away, like, okay, who's gonna pay for that, or something like that. So being open and being flexible, and also giving trust to the people and to your team, meaning that you don't have to know everything. You don't, because it's a new situation for everyone. This is a little bit kind of like showing your own weakness in a sense as well. But listening to your own team, kind of like playing from there, I think it's has been really important through the situation, because we are not able to be on the same place. We're not able to look after each other all the time, like on the same room anymore. So it's really important to have that open dialogue with your team.
Did you see that overwhelm in any parts, or did you see people helping each other? I mean, yeah, that's.
I think it came for us. It came naturally, like, you know, people inside the team helping each other. But one thing that I noticed is that it's taking a lot more time. It's taking a lot more time from my perspective to you know, push those discussions and have that communication ongoing. And really, even though that I feel myself that I'm an empathic person, let's say, I care about the people who work with me. But I still had to make an effort to remember that, okay, I need to ask how these things go, because usually we would ask those things naturally at the office, and that doesn't exist anymore. So I had to, you know, make an effort to actually, you know, to make that communication happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think from our perspective, we probably saw a comfort in uncertainty, in terms of people being more comfortable to trust in a video meeting. They put more weight in a Zoom call. You know, I previously would find myself traveling to China or Asia or North America once a month, and you know, that would be sometimes to show trust and faith to the, you know, parties or the investees, and meet and see what's going on. And you know, the physicality you know, was just gone for 12 months. You know, we haven't traveled internationally from here for 12 months. So we became really reliant on offices in the different countries, or representative offices where we had. And I think we refocused our trust in ways we judge and impact. And like, we've done investments where, you know, typically we'd never do an investment without site visiting. And we've done a number of those in the last 12 months, which, you know, is just a different cultural, you know, way of doing it, which comes back to sort of relying on the financial data being kept and having more data to be able to sort of validate things which you otherwise might take comfort in. So I guess well-being is one of those as well. You want to know how, you want to see that data and that evidence of you know, people's reactions, whether positive or negative.
Yeah, and to that, coming back a little bit to that clarity, what you mentioned there, Stephen, and you know, keeps popping up as an understanding on also on the financial perspective. What we did, you know, as a situation just before we were preparing ourselves for a funding round just before pandemic, and when it hit, we were in a very tough position, because of course, you know, the financial markets went, you know, upside down as well. So we had to rethink everything. But one thing, from a clarity perspective, what we wanted to kind of like double check in a sense, which I think was one of the main things for our success, that we actually even were able to survive through and move forward, was that we took a third party, you know, additional reporting to give some peace of mind to shareholders and stakeholders. You know, we've been also working with Acario for some time, and you know, being very happy about it. So what we did is that we actually took like additional round of reporting from them to support the financial clarity, to make sure that, okay, look, this is actually how it is. And I think that kind of like unlocked a lot of you know, doors for us to have that discussion, that we could go over that uncertainty that the pandemic is actually creating for many businesses. So that just as in practical, kind of like a case that could be done to boost the confidence for the financiers.
Just one more question around innovation. So, how important or relevant is innovation given the current pandemic?
Yeah, look, I mean, I'll jump straight into that. I think, a lot of the themes of what both Jaakko and I are saying is just, investment has become far more data driven and far more nimble. If you're not having an element of innovation about what you're doing and able to be adaptive, yet still stay the course, you just won't survive. And whether that's a change in regulatory environment for a lot of the retail or hospitality sectors where government stepped in and provided sort of part or full subsidies for wages in place and replacement revenue effectively in some places, but that wasn't the case everywhere. So, and it wasn't necessarily received equally or understood equally. So good advice, understanding how to do these things in order to deal with the uncertainty is important. But I think innovation needs to be at the core of that, and it's not just about R&D or a division. It's about a culture at the leadership set for the team, which is problem solving. It's fundamentally an element of problem solving and thinking about how you adapt to a changing environment. From my perspective,
Yeah, I would say that based on the discussion, what we've gone through during this year with a lot of different entities, from starting from financial institutions and these funding discussions, as well as different business partners or potential business partners, but as well as customers or potential customers from the sales side. So always the structure of the discussion is always the same. Okay, we're in a bad situation with the pandemic and everything. Are you going to survive? Okay, then you're going to provide some financial data. Then you're going to provide some information. Okay, we're going to survive. Good, we're going to survive. End of discussion. And then we move forward. The next question is always like, okay, we understand that things are a little bit, on hold. Maybe there's less resources to invest in a certain, innovations at this point. But nevertheless, and this might sound harsh, but everything is like, nevertheless, everyone is looking past that. So it is basically so straightforward that everybody's thinking like, what happens after? Like, everybody understands that it's taking time, and we're in a place where it's slower for innovation. But what is happening after that? And how do you make sure that after the pandemic, you're relevant again? And it might not be the same thing that you were relevant before. And it's totally okay to survive at first, but then you would at the same time start thinking like, okay, when we get going again, how we're going to be different, or how we're going to bring in new things. And even like I mentioned, not just investors, but also customers are already asking from us, like, okay, what's happening next? Like, what are the things that, how you're taking this into an account, that that the world is not going to be the same. Like, we use the example of touchscreens. So one of the things that is going to change is that people are not going to touch things as much as before. So we're not we're not going back to the same thing what we were before, but we're completely different thing after the pandemic, and the customers and the investors and everybody's asking that. So I think it's a very essential part of the process that if we're generally speaking about innovation, has to be part of each and every part of trying to survive from the not just surviving from the pandemic or the crisis, but what comes after. Because if you don't do that, then you're not going to survive after the crisis, because of course there's competition on the market. It's not going to be walk in the park after the pandemic. There's going to be competition, and there's going to be new problems coming in, or challenges moreover, what you have to overcome. So maybe that's my take on the innovation, that you just have to find resources and time and power to actually push those forward as well, because otherwise you're just gonna fall behind, because everyone is investing in it, even with these times.
Thank you for that. I'd like to just jump on to one question. So, how do you navigate strategic decision making in such a volatile market?
This is a question from Joe Webb.
From
So
Joe
thanks,
Webb.
yeah, thanks Joe for putting the question forward. Um, Maybe I'll jump in there, guys. And look, I think it really depends on the sector or the industry you're in, but I think it comes back to leadership. Ultimately, it comes back to setting a vision that needs to survive whatever crisis comes, whether it be the pandemic or otherwise. But I guess the drivers behind that, in terms of the volatility of the market, come back to cost control, readiness of data, execution, and fundamentally making sure the thematic that you're invested in is going to survive, the shifting market conditions, and really being honest with yourself and working out, which I know, Joe, I'm sure you've been very good at this, but making sure what you're pursuing is relevant, whether if you've got choice in front of you, and the market's telling you something about your product or your service or your investment or your incubated commodity that you're pursuing. I think ultimately you want to sort of listen to the market and use the same fundamental cost controls, but to sort of focus or prioritize that part of your business that is ready for the market at that point in time. So I think it goes back to sort of adaptability and so forth. But fundamentally, volatility is here to stay, at least for some time. So I think, the strategic decision making still has to be 3-4 years out, but the readiness of making sure you can move as quickly as you possibly can to execute and meet market, and quicker cycles.
Yeah. We could go for, I'm going to say, for hours on that topic, on what we've done wrong. I could tell all of those. I don't have any right answer there, but I think I have one very important point that has helped me as a growth company executive on making some kind of strategic decision making process, and how that has changed through the pandemic. So of course, what was mentioned many times, like know where you are and know the basics. That's the first step, and it's even more important than before. But from a vision perspective and so forth, I don't think it's a question where you are actually going, or how to actually get there. But the question is that simple enough, or is that understandable enough? So basically, complicated structures are not surviving at this moment. And what I noticed, like when we were pre-COVID, we were the value proposition for our business was working quite well, but it was too complicated for the times of crisis. When basically when the crisis is taking a big chunk of the attention of every business, and if your value prop is too complicated, it is just making it really hard to sell, essentially. And it's really making it really hard for people to understand, or your own people as well, to understand what you guys are doing. So what we're basically doing at this moment as well is that we are revamping our value prop to be more simplified. So we're taking the small branches out, what might have been good for us before. So we're kind of like, we're pushing things to concentrate on a certain segment, certain topic, certain case, certain value prop for our customers. So it's making our lives easier as well. It's making easier to make this decision if those are good for us from a strategic perspective. So basically, when before we were looking for new ways of actually finding business and finding customers and finding different ways, we're actually doing the opposite now. We're trying to take that out. That's not working well. That's not working well enough. That's working somehow. Let's take that out as well, and try to concentrate on the one thing that is taking us forward. That is not an easy decision to do, but simplifying is one of the most important thing. What I would say on making those decisions, and eventually, if you simplify enough, there's no any other options to go for. So I think that's the main giveaway. What I think from a personal perspective I could give to that strategic question.
I mean, I would just add my own personal perspective. It's sort of shared, obviously, a general response, but in our own businesses, you know, we increasingly put emphasis on data, and we wanted to know where we stood, not monthly, not quarterly. We wanted to know daily. It became really relevant, and it allowed us to move quickly. We also wanted to know that the entrepreneurs who ran the investee businesses that we were invested in, you know, were thinking ahead. They were adaptive. They were shaken out of the sort of, hey, there's a crisis, my world's changing, and they were actually going through that next phase after the realization and going, hey, now what do we do about it? We wanted that to happen as quickly as possible. And those companies that we were backing that were thinking like that and executing fast, we were able to direct more capital towards and support and actually take advantage, you know, for want of a better word, of the opportunities that naturally flow out of crises. I mean, if you go back to one of the large, you know, financial crises, you know, in 2007, 2008, 2009, you know, that was when a lot of large companies that we have now, Facebook, you know, Amazon, and others, sort of took off, or others as well. So crises create massive opportunity, and I think because they're rapid periods of change, and I think, you know, in terms of the volatility in it, you have to sort of let go of the preconceptions, or we had to let go of some of the preconceptions we had. And, you know, we had a drone business as one example that we were invested in Africa. We couldn't fly over to see it. We haven't been able to sort of go and site visit or talk to the people on the ground. They were selling services which were, you know, were technology-driven drone services to the mining sector, tourism sector. Now, tourism stopped almost overnight, and so that client base disappeared. And then, you know, some of the other the idea of actually going out when there was lockdowns on meant that revenues, you know, could potentially cease entirely. So that company had to innovate. But it not only had to innovate, it had to kind of redefine who the customer was. So they took their equipment, their toolkit, you know, so to speak, their ability to take a, you know, a sensory device, a machine like a drone, put it up in the sky, and then find a customer who needed it during the crisis. So they started working for government. They started working for utilities, essential services that also had the remote problems themselves, and they became part of the solution rather than a consequence of the problem. And I think that type of leadership that company and that entrepreneur, Eric and Mami and their team, gave them the opportunity to grow where they were otherwise facing, you know, potentially no revenue for a period of time. They were able to flip that on its head and become part of, you know, an East African solution to monitoring hotspots, monitoring malaria outbreaks, and monitoring things. So I think that's kind of a good analogy of, you know, ways to handle the challenges that present us, and that gave us confidence then to invest more.
Makes sense. Thank you so much. Since we're literally towards the end of the webinar, I'd like to also emphasize the fact that if you'd like a health check done on your businesses, please don't hesitate to drop us an email along with any questions you may have. Thank you very much, Stephen and Jaakko. Really appreciate your time. And all of you who are on this call right now, thank you very much. And I hope this was a useful session. Look forward to probably another one in the next couple of months. Thank you so much for being connected.
Thank you, Bharat.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, bye.